and welcome to the Special Needs Sibling Podcast, where we talk about what life is really like as a sibling to someone with special needs. I'm your host, Charlene, and today our guest is Emma. Welcome to the podcast.
Hello, happy to be here.
Awesome. Um, so Emma, could you tell us a little bit about your family structure, kind of like you, any siblings you have, and then who has a disability?
Absolutely. Um, yeah, thank you so much for having me. My name is Emma Schaus-Garten, and I live in Nashville, Tennessee. And my family of origin is all still here in the Middle Tennessee area. So um, I am the older sister to two younger brothers who are twins. I'm 34 years old, and they'll be 27 years old this fall. Um, and so one of the twins, Evan, has autism and intellectual disability labels, and then various other behavioral health, mental health
Mm-hmm.
diagnoses. And then his twin brother is named Brendan, and he doesn't have any intellectual or developmental disabilities. He lives in a teeny little rural town called Bon Aqua, and works at uh, a, a nursing home, aging care facility. Evan right now gets Medicaid waiver supports, so he has daily
Mm-hmm.
staff support that help him kind of get through his daily routine. Um, going to music therapy and horseback riding therapy, and just out and about to go hiking or go to parks or that sort of thing. And he lives really close to my folks, just about 10 minutes away. And they're
Oh,
um,
wow.
both my parents and Evan are in a suburb outside of Nashville called Franklin, and then I'm in downtown Nashville. So we're all within like 30-40 minutes of each other. I'm married and actually have our first kiddo on the way, which is exciting.
Oh, so
Yeah.
exciting. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Cool.
Yeah, so Evan's disability, um, kind of what that looks like. He has some pretty significant support needs. Communication is really one of the biggest ones. It's really hard for us to know what Evan is thinking or feeling. He very rarely uses language, spoken or written, or any other form
Oh,
to
okay.
communicate. Um, so kind of the best way that we have found as a family and other supporters in Evan's life to get at what he wants or feels is by offering written choices. So sometimes that looks like, offering different meals, or places to
Mm,
go, or
yeah.
or how he's feeling or whatever. And even then, it's just really our best guess. Who knows if we're actually offering the right choices, or whatever.
Oh,
So that
that's
feels,
crazy. That's
yeah,
hard.
kind of hit or miss. Um,
Yeah.
but so a lot of the our quality time together, he and I, and with our family, is spent kind of just quiet time, walking out
Yeah.
in nature, or watching movies together and snuggling up on his couch. And
Aw.
um yeah, so it's a different kind of sibling relationship for sure, but one that has just as many, if not more, benefits and pros as it has challenges
Yeah.
or
Did he ever use PEX at any point in time? Or does he currently use it at all?
yeah. So the way that I have kind of explained it, it's like he's 27 and he's been in speech therapy since he was diagnosed with autism. And we've tried just about every system, or communication device, alternative augmentative communication device. It seems like a lot of them, he understands when he's working with a speech therapist, like he can do what they're asking him to do,
Okay.
but he never independently uses it like on his own to communicate. So
Oh,
um
interesting. That's
yeah,
a
it almost kind of
okay.
feels like he sees that as, an activity or homework or something that he's doing to please
Yeah.
somebody else, but he never ever initiates it, never goes and gets his iPad or writes stuff down on his own. And even when we're using those programs, it feels a little hit or miss as to whether or not he's just picking something to get us to leave him
Right.
alone, or if it's an
Yeah.
active reflection of, his real
The
feelings,
actual desires, yeah.
or
Oh,
desires.
that's
So,
so interesting. I don't think I ever thought about that. Like, cause Angela has gone. We've done speech therapy. She used to use PECs. Like, we've
mhm,
done. I probably not as much a variety of things as
mhm,
Evan has, but it it's interesting the idea that she'll kind of like say certain things because she wants to versus when it's quote
mhm,
unquote forced upon. I use that very lightly, but there's no kind of other way to phrase that. But it's yeah, I kind of think about certain instances because we used to have this thing where she would have to say certain sentences to do things,
mm,
but it's very much like she would just say them because she knew that the end result of that action was then the thing that she wanted. She just needed to say it to get there, but now it's kind of just she doesn't. She knows she doesn't need to say it to get that,
mhm,
which is kind of an interesting development, I think, in how they choose to communicate because it's like when she wants to talk, she only can use limited vocabulary, but it's when that but she's wanting to talk versus the other times where she's
mhm,
not wanting to talk, but in theory would talk more, but only because she's kind of having to for
yeah.
no other reason than we just want her to say something.
Absolutely. For actually, it's interesting that this has come up because I just had a phone call with my mom today where she has a new idea about a communication, like, you know, a therapeutic approach, or, a philosophy, a new technique that she thinks, may be kind of new and out there, but she wanted my opinion on, like, well, is it worth trying? And you know, I I I felt kind of torn. One part of me says it's always worth trying something that could,
Yeah.
possibly result in us getting a better picture into what Evan wants or needs, or
Yeah.
how he's feeling. At the same time, though, I think at some point we as family members and supporters may need to just, kind of accept that, like, he may have some real limitations in this area of life, and it's
Mm.
on us to, continue trying to think creatively about how we can best, use our powers of observation or problem solving or creative thinking, um, to meet him where he is, rather than, always just expecting this young man who's, wanting to live a good, happy, fun life to spend hours and hours in, speech therapy with
Yeah.
professionals every week. So there's a balance there for sure.
Yeah. I think the balance, which is one of the things that we had talked about
Mm,
like before we're recording, and I think that's one of the things that you did want to talk about, which is kind of like this balancing act of like sibling, parent, and then
mm,
kind of like this in between. But it's like you're still yeah. There's so many things, and then and the third thing is then there's ourselves, which that doesn't even come into the picture. I think until probably not much later, and what than what you would think.
mhm,
Like I don't think I realized how much that I did not put myself as part of the balancing act until after I started going to therapy, which would have been in my like I started going in my late 20s. And
mhm.
so it's yeah, it's kind of like you just thought it was sibling versus parent in yourself, but it's really sibling parent versus and in yourself and kind
Yeah,
of all these other things. Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, that was, um, I think, as I'd shared in our previous conversation. I mean, I I feel like I feel like my childhood and teen years were very much about, kind of trying to be the best sister I could be, but also feeling like a third parent in a lot of ways. I mean, both my mom and my dad are active in supporting Evan in different ways, but it kind of felt like there was this not even pressure, but just like I felt like should be,
Mhm.
helping them problem solve about like
Right.
what does Evan need and
Mhm.
what's going to help him. And I was very anxious about the idea of if something were to happen to my parents, if I would need to step in to a parental role for both of my brothers. I think part of that is probably my personality, and part of it is that I was 6 7 years older, and they both
Yeah.
had some pretty significant needs when they were that age. And yeah, I feel like I ended up going to college right down the road, and I married somebody who got along really well with Evan, and made all of these big life decisions, totally informed by um, not just my brother, but what I felt like was my responsibility. And
Mhm. Mhm.
it was not really until therapy, until I kind of had so much anxiety that it was not a sustainable way to be living
Yeah.
as a 23, 24, 25 year old,
Yep.
and started really peeling back the layers of who am I besides just a sister, and kind of on mom and dad's team to
Mhm.
support Evan, and like what do I want for my own life and my downtime. Because I felt like even when I was, in college and starting my career as a young professional, and doing things on my own, I was it's not like I was doing daily caregiving or anything, but it
Right.
felt like life just felt like a lot heavier than it seemed to for my peers. And I felt like I was always, thinking 10 steps ahead, and
Mhm.
saving, like thinking about saving money for when I would inevitably need to, financially contribute to Evan's needs. And do I need to be saving for a home that has a bedroom where Evan could live? And all of just kind of that was always part of my mental picture of future caregiving responsibilities, and what I needed to be doing currently to support my family. Evan's later teen years were really turbulent and rough, a lot of major behavioral uh, aggression and self-injury episodes that were, we were all just kind of at a loss as to what the right answer was to help him kind
Mhm.
of de-escalate and be happier and calmer. All that to say, I found therapy so helpful in, for the first time, really thinking about what do I want my role in Evan's life to be, not
Mm.
just um, what are my parents expecting of me, what are other people who praise me for being such a good sister, what are they going to expect me to do, or what do I feel like I need to step in and do, but like in my ideal world, what would um, a, a good sister role look like and feel like? And so I feel like my late 20s and up until today has been kind of trying to figure that out. And I don't know that I've come to any answers, but it definitely um a better balance of
Yeah.
personal time, of when I'm not with my family, or not with Evan, letting go of frustrations that I may have about
Mhm.
his services and how they're not working quite as well as I wish that they were, or whatever. And figuring out what's mine to worry about and what's not.
Yeah, especially because you live so close. Because, like,
Mhm,
for me, because I'm like 11 and a half hour drive from where Angela lives, and so,
mhm.
like, I obviously can't be involved in, like, day-to-day stuff. Not that I need to be,
Yeah,
but it's
yeah,
this weird it was this weird feeling for so long, probably until she, like, had her housing situation, like, solidified, where I was like, I can't move.
Mm,
right? Like and that was, no one had said don't move, right? And no one
mhm,
was obligating me to do that, but inside I'm like, oh no, like I should, right? Like if I'm a
yeah,
good sister, or if I'm a good pseudo parent or whatever, like then I need to
mm,
be semi near around. But what, yeah, once her housing situation got solidified, I was like, oh, like it, I could literally feel this like relief of like, oh, like
mhm.
I am not being held responsible for this.
Yeah, I have
And then,
options.
yeah, and it's, I can go travel the world, or I can go move wherever. It wasn't a, yeah, there was no like, what is that, like the shackles or whatever,
Mhm.
like ball and chain or whatever, because it's,
Yeah.
which is such an, like, it's so crazy the amount of kind of expectation, obligation, and duty that we put on ourselves as siblings,
Mhm.
where really, like, I feel like most people that I have talked to, their parents have not said that to them out loud, right?
Yeah. A
Most
lot of
people
it
I've talked to is like, yeah, it's fine, like, go do whatever, but just on the inside, it just does not feel
yeah,
like that.
a lot of the I think a lot of the pressure to be really hyper responsible as a family member, as a sibling, for a lot of us can be an internal motivated thing of
Hmm.
it feels like what we should do. I almost sometimes think of it or thought of it as like a feedback loop though, like the thing that got me the most praise and attention from adults from the time I was really little was being a good sister to Evan. You know,
Oh,
when I
me
was
too. Yep.
being the typical role model, pure role model in his, inclusive preschool classes or speech therapy classes, or
Mm.
running around at church after him when he
Yeah.
would flee the worship service, and I'm like, oh god, all sorts of stuff. It was it was nice to hear from all of these adults
Yeah.
praising me that sacrificing my own needs and paying attention to Evan was praiseworthy. And so I think that made me want to do it more. And then it's kind of how I began to see the role of older sister.
Mm.
That's what I should
Mhm.
do. And yeah, I think I just didn't really think that there was another way of being
Yeah.
a sister until well into my adulthood of like, I could let some of this go. I don't have to go see him every week. I don't have to be on
Yeah.
every email chain about his
Right.
services and supports, or I don't have to I can have boundaries with my parents when it comes to, being told about every single, hard thing that's happening in his
Right.
day. I can't really fix it. So it was just,
And
adding to
nor
my
is it your responsibility to do
part
that
of
at
my
all. Like, you don't even need to know. Yeah.
so yeah.
Yeah. There's yeah. There's just so many. There's so much nuance to it, and it's something that I've. I don't know. I'm kind of on this. I mean, it's an ever flowing thing, and I think it's kind of like you go through different like phases of kind of like where you're at with your sibling in general, and like with your parents. And I think like for me, I went through a very long extended phase of kind of like the being the good daughter and the good sister and the good kid, and it's like I did that for like kind of so long that I'm now in this like, just leave me alone. Like I don't want to help you. I don't want to hang out with you. I don't want to
Yeah.
talk to you, right? And it's kind of this like, cuz it's just there's so much energy, and I mean like
Mhm.
it's not even the same type of energy that you would use like for a pet or for your other typical siblings that are younger, right? Cuz you had another brother, and I'm sure like the energy that you use just hanging out with him as an older sister is very much different than with Evan, right? Like,
Yeah.
and it's like it's exhausting.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting, at least for for me, and given who Evan is and
Mhm.
Evan's needs. I don't know if this will always be true, but when I'm with Evan and it is just us two,
Yeah.
it's like a respite for my soul. Like Evan doesn't expect anything of me. He's happy just being
Oh,
quiet,
interesting.
like like being quiet with me and going on a walk or watching TV. It's kind of
Yeah.
all the other stuff that is so exhausting of like, if that his that the staff who work with him like clearly aren't reading the
Mhm.
support plans, so they will trigger his behaviors and set him off and it's a huge crisis. Or my
Mhm.
parents are super hyper worried about X, Y, and Z and they need to process all of their feelings. Or they want my
Mhm.
opinion about things. Or we find out that his staff is quitting, and so who knows if the person coming in to replace them will be somebody who really gets along well with Evan, or if it'll be somebody who treats him like a child, even though he's a 27-year-old man, just because he
Yeah.
can't speak. And so it's almost like being physically present with Evan when I make the time to do that is always really restorative and nice for me.
Mm.
But there's so much other stuff that comes with supporting someone with significant disabilities, and then also all the family dynamics on the periphery of that I find really exhausting sometimes. And it does have to be now something that it's like, all right, only when I have the emotional energy and capacity to do it, and I'm allowed to say, you know what, no, I can't do a family dinner this week. Or come to Evan's support planning meeting this time. I'm gonna have to sit it out.
Yeah. And it's such like a it's such an interesting thing where like it's so hard to go from oh like I would like wanting to be there 100% of the time like when we're growing up as kids to
Mm.
realizing that as adults like we can't and nor should we have the capacity to do that to live our own lives.
Yeah.
Right, because it's like you like there's so many times I'm like oh that'd be cool for me to be involved, but it's like but that doesn't help me be a better version of Charlene.
Mhm.
Right, like it's just
Yeah.
and like that's one of the other interesting things like as a kid, like that's such a hard thing. Well, okay, I mean even as an adult, that's a hard thing to realize itself without, kind of having outside perspective, whether that be a therapist or someone very close to you, whoever that may be. But it's like as a kid, that's also you don't even know that's happening because it's just in real time and it's a lot of overwhelming things. But there's this other concept of like you pick and choose your battles with
Mhm.
everybody, like with your friends, with your parents, with your siblings, with yourself, and it's I feel like for me like internally that was very exhausting. Like would I rather spend the energy fighting with my parents or spend the energy just doing what they said to just kind of mitigate a situation?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think part of the equation for me these days in figuring out, pick, picking your battles, or finding what I want to prioritize when it comes to Evan and family, is recognizing that as my parents get older, I
Mm-hmm.
will I was going to say I will have to. I guess that's worth questioning, right? I don't have to, but
Right.
I will likely step into a larger support and caregiving
Mm-hmm.
role for Evan, in terms of coordinating,
Yeah.
a lot of his services, and making sure none of the balls are dropped when it comes
Yeah.
to all of the many professionals in his life that
Yeah.
touch his life or whatever. But um all that to say, like, I've always been hyper aware of, like, 10 years, 15 years, 20
Mm.
years down the road, like, all of that falls to me. And so right now, I want to give myself a lot of leeway and freedom um, to do my own
Mhm.
thing and to really enjoy this season of life where I don't have to carry that load as much.
Yeah.
Which, is not the case for all siblings. A lot of siblings never have that break, right? They're always,
Yeah.
whether that's because their parents aren't capable of managing things or their parents have their own like major mental health or health needs. The
Mhm.
typical sibling um, never gets their own life. But
Yeah.
for those of us who do, before we kind of have to step into a bigger support role when our parents are gone, I think we owe it to ourselves to make the most of this this time when we have more freedom to pick and choose those battles
Yeah.
or those priorities.
Yeah, and I think it's a great perspective too, just because it's so easy to future think all the time versus just realizing, like, like my sister right now, like in her housing, my parents are not that old, so it's kind
Mhm.
of like I have some time,
You have
and
some time, absolutely.
yeah, and it's just this thing you just don't realize it. So
Mhm.
thank you for like saying that out loud because it just
Yeah.
I didn't even realize it because it's kind of these because you kind of just you see this like timeline of your life kind of all
Mhm.
the time and it's like oh she's this old these services are happening oh then she's gonna turn this old then these are gonna happen oh then my parents gonna right like and it just kind of is this kind of like doom cloud that just kind of gives you your I'm gonna count out how many years you have left and then it's not like we're choosing to do that it's just kind of in
Yeah,
the
it's just
territory and it's like
yeah.
but yeah, but it's so important for us to just realize like we can enjoy life. Like I can go ride a roller coaster, and it's fine.
Mhm.
I can like go eat this
Absolutely.
food, and like like not, it's fine. Like I don't have to always I don't always have to call right,
Mhm.
but I can call, and I think that's one of the things that I've been kind of more recently been trying to navigate or just kind of like reflect on is kind of
Mhm.
what are things that I want to do with my sister that can just be me and my sister and not having to be like all four of us because for so long it was always just the four of us like whether it just was related to her or not right like even if it
Mhm.
was only about her it would still involve all four of us and now I'm like like that's like I can have my own life and she can have her own life and my parents can have their own lives but that also can mean that statistically the four of you can interact with each other in a multitude of ways which is also important because that's something that I struggled with like growing up was like it was very much like me and my dad on one side of the equation and my mom and sister on the other side and it was very much just split down the middle like that
Mm.
pretty much all the time just because that's how it worked out for them so that's just what they did and it's
Yeah.
but as you get older right it's kind of like well I need both of them and my sister also needs both of them right it can't be
Yeah.
only just separated like that for
Yeah.
forever
I don't know if this makes sense, but so I run I mean, this is how you found me, but for your
right
podcast listeners,
yeah
I am involved with the National Sibling Leadership Network. And so many states, about 26 states, have state chapters of the Sibling Leadership Network. And I run Tennessee's state chapter, which is called TABS, Tennessee Adult Brothers and Sisters. But something that had kind of come up a few times in Tab's virtual chats where we had a speaker, who would be talking about navigating challenging family dynamics or, healthy communications and setting boundaries within families or whatever, those kinds of topics. It's like family stuff is hard for almost everybody, right? Disability or no, like
yes
navigating the
yeah
transition of
mm-hmm.
from a parent child relationship to like an adult child, like
mm.
as you get older, redefining your relationships with your parents and
Yeah.
how those dynamics change, and same with your siblings, going from interacting as kids to then your adult peers. Like all of that stuff is hard for everybody, but like when there's a significant disability in the picture, it just adds an extra layer of complication
Yeah.
to it. So that's, I don't know, that was just on my mind as you were saying that. Like I definitely relate to time alone for me with Evan is much less stressful than time together as a whole
Yeah.
family, because then it feels like I'm like the referee for like, oh,
Yeah.
well, okay, so mom's clearly her temper is short because she's hungry, so now she's snapping and like I can
Yeah.
see and dad snapped back and I can see Evan starting to get irritable, so I have to like diffuse the stress of the situation
Yeah.
or whatever. And like it's so easy for me to fall back into those sorts of roles of like
Mhm.
being the family like peacekeeper and like
Yeah.
the one to try and check on everybody's like emotional
Yep.
well-being and mood, and like that means I'm never like really fully present then, I think. And so I found it, at least for right now, to be a lot easier to kind of focus on nurturing individual relationships with
Yes.
Evan and with my mom and with my dad and with other brother, because big family gatherings still feel pretty complicated
Oh, I
to
agree.
me
Yeah. I
sometimes.
did those are some of my least favorite. And it's not that I don't care about everyone. It's just
No,
it's hard like and
maybe
it's
we
very
care
much
too much, right, Charlene?
yeah. Oh yeah,
I
there we
have
go.
so
Yeah,
many
that's a very
feelings and so much love about it, and it's like very stressful when it doesn't go well.
yeah, because you're kind of bracing for the worst, and then like you might get lucky and the worst won't happen. But like once you see your sibling with a disability, once they start to like disengage, you're like, oh no, like no one else
Uh-oh,
is
here it
noticing
comes.
it, and you just kind of go into this panic mode. But you're trying to like maintain what's
Yeah.
happening, but keep them at ease. But then like dealing with your
Mhm.
parents trying to salt, like it's just there's
Yeah,
so much to a family gathering that like I just there's too much stuff. Like I don't. It's not.
100%.
Yeah, it's not my favorite instance of time ever.
Oh.
Yeah. Oh, those are hard. Yeah. How do you feel about like so because you mentioned that your mom had talked to you just like recently about the new communication stuff. So how do you feel like about being involved now that you kind of have like your space and kind of have like a better idea of like how much you want to be involved? Like how is that now for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think over the past few years, I have just learned to that I have to be more vocal with my parents of about like, well, yeah, so like right now, I'm feeling curious about how things are going with Evan. And so if you'd
Mhm.
like to, like I'll check in more often with them, like, hey, how was your visit with Evan today?
Mhm.
Um, or did we ever hear back from, the provider agency about this problem that you mentioned, and kind of initiating things. And then when life is really stressful, I mean, for example, in 2020, my husband was in a really serious car accident. He's okay now. I mean, he's pretty much recovered now, but like
Mhm.
at that point, for like a year, I was like, I don't have it in me to like come to any of these, meetings about Evan's services and all of the problems that are
Mm.
going on. Like,
Mhm.
if you think of a question that like I am better suited to answer than anybody else, give me a call. Otherwise, I'm gonna have to step out. Like, and
Yeah.
and so that's worked well. I mean, again, I feel lucky because we, through sibling networks, we certainly meet siblings whose parents are not respectful of those boundaries, right? And they
Mhm.
will um
Yeah.
they get a lot put on their plate whether or not they express that they're overwhelmed. But
Mm.
for me, that's
Yeah.
been a positive thing once I felt empowered to say like, I don't have the time or emotional capacity to
Yeah.
help with Evan's stuff right now. Can you take me can you take me off of your call list temporarily,
Yeah.
or off of the email thread with the behavior therapist about how A, B, and C problems are happening. I
Yeah.
just It's making me stressed. They're super respectful of that, and then I'll step back in when I feel like
Yeah.
I do have some energy. So
Yeah, that's I'm glad that I'm well, I'll say first I'm glad that you vocalize your
mhm.
boundaries to start with, and then I'm also glad that your parents respect your boundaries. So, like those two things are both hard on their own, and then
Yeah.
you add the oh, we're just typical kids. You add that to the
Mhm.
equation, and there are so many things with that. Because yeah, I think I more recently kind of increased my feelings vocabulary on like I
Yeah.
feel this emotion and it's due to whatever, right? And there's just stuff that I'm processing where there's just feelings that I kind of like residually have even though I'm like not with Angela
Yeah.
right now that like I just have kind of these residual things from when we were growing up that kind of just never went away cuz I just never one never knew they were there and then two just never kind of acknowledged that right that I did that I felt that way because it's
Yeah.
I've like I think for I don't know about for you but for me like it was this idea that oh you know you're the good sister you're a good kid you get good grades you do all these good things you help mom and dad like you know the list goes on but it's this thing where like then I felt that I could not be unhappy in any form. I felt like I couldn't get mad. I feel like I couldn't be sad. I feel like I could. I feel like I couldn't cry. My husband used to joke with me when we were dating that like I had no heart, right? Because for movies he loves movies and like he'll cry and it's fine. But it's so it was just this very long time of like I would only cry when I was like really upset. But you know that threshold is pretty high, and
Yeah.
so it's this thing where I didn't even yeah I've suppressed whatever you know was not happy down that I just it's just taken a long time to kind of navigate through it and even now right there's still things where like well like that hurt my feelings but it's from like 20 years ago and I'm still hurt
Yeah.
about it because I never got to tell my parents hey like that
Mhm.
hurt my feelings right because I just was like oh I must be wrong because you're my parents and Angela's okay or not okay, right? It's just you kind of deprioritize
Mhm.
everything and your feelings. That I don't know. That's how I felt. I don't know if you had any of those
Yeah, no,
experiences.
that resonates a lot. I mean, everything you said about, wanting to be a good daughter, wanting to be a good sister, the well-behaved one, the
Mm-hmm.
one with the good grades and model student, like it feels like I spent my entire childhood and teen years like just trying to like tread carefully and not
Yeah.
stress anybody out, and that often meant suppressing my own emotions, or at least not asking for help, dealing with them on my own in my room, after everybody
Mm-hmm.
had gone to bed. Like that was
Yeah.
the only time I could cry or whatever. But never, expressing any sort of, anger or sadness or anything, because it felt like no one had the capacity to help me.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody was
Yep.
stressed.
Yeah.
And so I felt like I just kind of had to be self-reliant, or to a certain extent. I think I was lucky in that I had a couple of close girlfriends who I leaned on, but like, yeah, family was not necessarily a space where I was going to get my full emotional needs met.
Yes.
um
Yeah. I agree. I agree with that.
but yeah, and the notion of like your threshold for tolerating,
Mm-hmm.
um like frustration or
Yeah.
anger or anxiety or whatever being really high resonates with me. Like, I think I first sought therapy after I reached that threshold of,
Mm.
um being, of just like, I am so anxious I can't handle it anymore, and I was that anxious because I
Mm-hmm.
was trying to be a perfectionist who was doing everything anyone asked of me,
Mhm.
never saying no to all of the favors or absolutely I can take
Yeah.
on this work project and, I want to be the best, most present friend. So of course I'll come talk you through your
Yeah.
breakup, even though I'm
Yeah.
like so exhausted.
Yeah.
Just, you know, that mindset of like
Yeah.
needing to be helpful, needing to be an overachiever, like I was able to like pull that off for a good 23 years and then
Yep.
I lost my mind.
Yep,
Just
yep, yep, yep.
so
I'm right there with
nervous.
you.
Yeah. I was just like, I'm so nervous all of the time, and, like, I mean, therapy was life-changing. As soon as I
Yes.
started to question, like, when, my therapist was like, "Well, do you who says you have to do these
You're
things?" Or
right.
what would happen if just think through it. What would happen if you said no or you didn't do well on this project? Do you think it would be okay? It's just
Yeah.
like you start pulling those threads and unraveling things. It's like, "Oh, right, I am allowed to be human and make
Yep.
mistakes and say no to things I don't wanna do." And
Yeah, and you're allowed
I
to be
really wish
upset
I'd
at
hadn't
people.
taken a nervous breakdown at, like, age 23, 24
Right.
in that
Yeah.
place, but, better late than never.
Yeah. No, yeah. No, therapy is so helpful. And I mean, like, I talk about a lot on the podcast. Probably every episode I talk about seeing my therapist, which, like,
Mhm.
but I'm all for it because there's just so many, like, kind of what we were talking about earlier, right? Like, navigating life is already hard for the average person who just has a
Mhm.
typical family and parents and that's in a healthy household,
Yeah.
right? Like, they, it's still hard, but there's just so many other complications when you have like your
Yeah.
sibling with a disability and your parents are trying to figure out, right? And it's like, and and I think it's gonna be interesting, kind of as like the newest set generation, however you want to call it, of typical kids who are now kind of like in their grade school,
Mm.
middle school ages, kind of get older because it's so different for them now, just like with the resources available for them as well as the technology for their parents the with their sibling who is disabled in whatever form, right?
Mhm.
Versus for us, it's kind of like, not that there was nothing, but there was just less, and it was different because
Yeah.
whatever my parents could find was just in books that happened to be published, right? The internet wasn't as, it's
Mhm.
nowhere what is now, right? And even then, it's
Yeah.
kind of like there were community groups, but it's only like if you could go, right? There's not kind of this online
Right.
forum where you can kind of like text people and get back and forth, where you kind of you had to show up and hope that your kid didn't
Absolutely.
have a breakdown in the middle of like whatever session was happening.
Or have your other typical kids babysit while you
Right.
go to the therapist
Yeah,
appointment.
exactly, right? And if your kids aren't old enough, well, you have to find some, right there. It's kind of like this different
Yeah.
dynamic of kind of how parents can support their kids and how we get supported. So it'll be kind of interesting. But I'm definitely
Yeah.
a advocate of therapy, and it for in whatever form that may be for people, just because it's
Mhm.
so important to. I mean, I think the biggest thing for me when I first started going to therapy was like your feelings are normal. Like, other
Mhm.
people have those feelings. Like, other people are also mad at their parents. Other people are upset. I was like, oh, like I just
Yeah.
genuinely didn't know. Cause I really thought, like, I loved my parents growing up, like they did. No, I was like
Mhm.
they did nothing wrong, blah blah blah. Like, I must have done something to deserve whatever punishment, right? And it's like that's not true, right? Like,
Well,
they've made like,
your only comparison is not the norm, right? Angela's
yeah.
way of being in the world is totally different. So, like, you really don't have another peer in the family exactly to compare those experiences to. I felt like I mean, my so Evan's twin, Brendan and I,
Mm-hmm.
in some ways, we have a a a brother-sister relationship, but in other ways, it really does still feel like I'm trying to unlearn being his parent too, and, like, letting go,
Oh, okay. Yeah.
letting go of, yeah, learning healthy boundaries there too, and not
Mm-hmm.
worrying about him way more than, an average 34-year-old sister needs to worry about her 27.
Right, right, right. Yeah, because there's just an extra level of care that you have that you probably
Yeah,
would not have had, like X, Y, and Z. But
yeah.
it's
So,
yeah,
I kind of feel like I didn't have an exact pure match,
yeah.
either in
Either,
terms of
yeah,
like it's not like we talked, all the time growing up about like mom and dad are so annoying or like, isn't it wild that
yeah,
they did this or whatever? It was just like we're all doing the best we can, and I assume this is normal.
yeah,
Then you get to like college and adulthood, and it's like, oh, maybe not all of that was normal, but like you said, and like your therapist said, like everybody is like untangling family
yeah,
dynamics and like figuring out like you know how to move into the next season of life with the kind of family relationships they want. And so
yeah,
yeah, I think pure support and mental health support and therapy being talked about so much more
yeah,
now than it ever was when we were growing up is such a positive thing. And I am
yeah.
hopeful that the next generation of young sibs who have brothers and sisters with disabilities really benefit from that.
Yeah, yeah. Me too. Um, is there any other topic that you would like to explore or talk about?
Um, I'll just end with encouraging your listeners to check out the Sibling Leadership Network if they haven't. Like I said, about half of the states have a state chapter
Yeah,
of the SLN. You can go to siblingleadership.org to find out if your state has a chapter. If they do, there's information there on how to get involved. I think it's really cool that it's a really diverse kind of network, and that some state chapters are pretty informal, like social groups, and they get together for,
yeah,
uh, happy hours or virtual meetings. And some are really well established, like community nonprofits with boards of directors and conferences or workshops and
yeah.
trainings, or they do camps for younger kids. And so it really just depends. Um, but they're all the chapters that are active are always looking for more people to get involved. It can be hard to track down us sibs. It's a lot trickier to find us than it is to find people with disabilities or parents of people with
Yes.
disabilities. So
Yes, I
um,
I 100% agree with just that. I mean, with everything you're saying, but particularly that part of the statement.
yeah.
Yes.
So we got to stick together. If your state doesn't have a chapter, I am the person you can come talk to. I am the SLN's co-chair of the chapter development committee, and so we, in addition to hosting quarterly calls to support the existing state chapters,
Mm.
to talk about everything from communications to fundraising to conference planning, or those sorts of things. We also um, will often chat with people from states who don't have an SLN chapter
Oh,
about what it
that's
looks like
great.
to kind of take some baby steps to get those groups off the ground. And it's, I mean, super low. I don't want to make it sound like it's no work at all, but to have a state chapter of the SLN, you just need three siblings of people with disabilities who are um, willing to commit to being involved in planning some kind of activity that can just be like a virtual get together, or it could be something more structured. um,
Mm.
and they're willing to commit for at least 6 months. So
Okay.
it's we're happy to brainstorm with you about where to find other siblings, and what events or support opportunities you might want to think about. So all that to say, that's the last thing I'll plug. But if you're a sibling of somebody with a disability and aren't connected to the SLN already, I hope
Yeah.
you'll check it out.
Yeah, and having like sibling community is so helpful and it's so important. And that's such it's such like an invaluable resource just to connect with even one other person who is a sibling, even if they live in another state or whatever it
Mhm.
is. Like it's it's so invaluable just because you can't, like, I can't even describe. I'm doing a terrible job at the moment trying to like find words to explain, because it's just, it helps so much with just things that you're going through, or like feelings that you have that you didn't know that you had, and kind of just like, whether it's like reading people's stories, listening to them, or just whatever it is. And it's, yeah, I'm glad, because in Oregon they just started one. So
Just started.
yeah,
Yeah.
so I think there's now, as of the last time we met, it was like 4 or 5 of us, something like that. So it's exciting because you can just start small, but that's, even that, like, it's such a big thing. Like,
Yeah.
it's so important. Yeah.
Absolutely. And podcasts like yours are a huge way that we're normalizing the
Yes.
SIB experience and connecting folks. So thanks for doing what you're doing.
Yeah. Thank you, and thank you for being on the podcast. Yeah. Cool. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Special Needs Sibling Podcast. If you're new here, please subscribe, rate, and review the show to help more siblings and friends find us. You can also support the podcast by donating on Ko-fi. That's Ko-fi. You can check out the link in the description for more info. If you're a special needs sibling, I hope you feel encouraged and validated in your journey. If you're not a sibling but know someone who is, I hope you learned a little bit more about what their life is like. That's all for now, and until next time, this is the Special Needs Sibling Podcast.